Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us on what is somewhat of a new adventure, I think, for Sydney Catholic Schools. It's very exciting. Christianity, you'll notice I've called it peace-seeking and peacemaking because I think we need to keep exploring the depths and the richness of this topic, which for me has always been the jewel in the crown of the Studies of Religion syllabus. The image is by a Turkish photographer or a person who puts together images of using photos of contrast, of juxtaposition. And this one, of course, is Christ, the Prince of Peace, who calls out, "Forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do," on a bullet. The image of so much in our world that seems to be wrong throughout history and particularly in the current era. Last Sunday, during the Sunday Angelus, Pope Francis prayed especially for the dreadful situation that is emerging in Israel and in Palestine. And his message is one that he just keeps reiterating over and over and over. And will the hate and the vendetta leave? Do we really think of building peace by destroying the other? And these are questions that are so pertinent to our exploration of, we have these high ideals of what religion can contribute to peace and what peace can look like, and yet we don't always seem to practice the ideal. So for this session, this was the plan. Going back to the original intention of the topic within the SOR syllabus, because I think since we wrote it, it's probably gone off in tangents that we didn't necessarily envisage. So a little bit of going back to the type of questions that students you will encounter in the trial and HSC and are possible. Everything is nuanced in the terms of it. This is one possible way of doing things. There is no one definitive way. Big thing I often get asked about is why am I so insistent on research, and I'd really like to tackle that a little bit today and show what it can look like. The absolute non-negotiable centrality of sacred text in not just peace, but in all aspects of the course. And this complexity around this thing that is called inner peace, which in hindsight, when we wrote the syllabus, I really wish it was called personal peace or something different. And the realistic possibility of world peace, which really should be called communal peace, because if Pope Francis can't do it or significant leaders can't do it, no one person is going to bring about world peace. At the end, all the past HSC questions there, and we'll integrate a few as we go. So I guess Pope Francis is continuing a long legacy of, at least in this century, of saying that really war is a defeat. If the best we can do as human beings is go to war, be that with each other in our personal circumstances or in the worldview, then we have failed. And really, I just like to start by saying that from Pope St. John Paul II and Francis and so many other religious leaders within Christianity, the notion of just war theory that originated with St. Augustine, really in a world where someone can sit on another continent, push a button, a drone will go up, people will be obliterated. The concept of the original intention of just war theory, while it may have its place, it was never the intention of this syllabus to talk about how religion justifies war. It's rather, what can religion add to creating peace? So I'd just like to make that point to start. The syllabus, I think, tells us exactly why we have to do the things we do. And it makes it very clear that to demonstrate how religions guide individuals, either in personal or communal peace, you can only show that through explicit, definitive examples. And that, of course, is where the research comes in, the inquiry, the providing, being able to demonstrate or to discuss, to show the for and against with issues. So I'm going to really focus quite a bit on the research today because, you know, the syllabus demands it, and it's there in the aims of the course. And really, the course came out of the context of the International Baccalaureate. That was its origins, really. And these things, these skills that we're hopefully giving to our students to set them up for if they go next year to uni, if they go to TAFE, they go to employment, whatever, then it's just non-negotiable that we help them drill down those research skills. It also makes this a far more meaningful, active study of what religion really does look like on the ground. And of course, the values of empathy and promoting justice. And as Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa said, we're all challenged to do our own little bit of good wherever we can. So for your students, and of course you're going to get all these materials will be provided to you by Sydney Catholic Schools. So, you know, there's lots of options going to come up in the HSC. They're all listed there, I'm not going to read them. My suggestion has always been with my own students and the students I work with in the 8 schools now, is that for each tradition, they have 2 really strong but diverse examples for both personal and and communal peace for each tradition. Then in the tradition that they feel most able in, that they have an additional one. This is in case, say you get a standalone on inner peace in one tradition. That's a complex question to answer. So I would encourage them to have that 3rd one as the backup for that standalone question. But obviously, and that might be different as it says there on the screen. Okay. When I work with students, I always say, think of your examples like Lego blocks. Lego Masters is on at the moment, and Lego Masters can do amazing things by putting all their blocks together. And each example is a block. And you don't need pages and pages and pages of notes. You do need to know the story well. You need brief notes, dates, people, short quotes, and obvious links to sacred texts and their teachings. That's a non-negotiable. So in terms of the examples, however, some students at HSC just write about their examples. They just describe them. And that's not the idea. Examples support answering the question. They are there to show what the sacred texts and the teachings they inform can look like in the actions, plural, sometimes quite oppositional actions of adherents of religious traditions. So when students are writing their response for R&P, they shouldn't start their paragraph, well, such and such is an example and da-da-da-da-da. They have to start with setting the context. They have to link to sacred text. What does it teach? And then they show what it looks like in action. And there will be circumstances where they show quite oppositional implementations of the teaching. So the other thing, of course, that is an absolute non-negotiable in every single aspect of studies of religion is the centrality of sacred text. And of course, the syllabus for religion and peace is a little bit different in that it defines for Christianity references from the New Testament. That doesn't mean, of course, at HSC marking, if someone does slip in a reference from the prophet Isaiah or Psalms or whatever, that is going to disadvantage them. But really, this is very much this, of all the Christian depth studies and this aspect of the course, religion and peace is really ultimately about how do Christians enact the example and the teachings of Jesus in their everyday lives. And the only way you can use that and show that is through reference to the New Testament, of course. So just take a quick look at last year's question. Interesting stimulus. Timothy Pina is discovered an American writer and social activist. The first part's fine. I thought the second little sentence there is a little, dare I say, a little hippie, but that's okay. So when you look at the question, you break it down. Well, how do? So you have to be able to there show cause and effect and the extent to which all of those deeper points of analysis. Remember, for any 20-mark question and also the 7, 8 markers in section 2, there is an expectation that they're going to be showing judgment analysis in some way, shape or form. So how do? At least one tradition. Now, I think sometimes students think, oh, but that means I have to write about both. At HSC, if markers have said in their mind that, oh no, they should write about 2, well then that's wrong. And I don't think it ever really happens. I hope it doesn't, because the question says 1. And so better able students who are really strong could present an amazing response just focusing on one tradition. But, you know, it's still open to both. But kids sometimes think they have to do both. Again, they need to play to their strengths. Significant writings. Significant writings within sacred texts encourage peace and harmony. I think this is a really, really important point, because I personally find it a little disheartening when students reach year 12 and the best they can do is say Jesus' commandment to love or blessed are the peacemakers. While that's all well and good, what does that love, what does that peacemaking look like in practice? And we'll do a little bit more on this afternoon. It is a bit hard when you're working in a vacuum here, but I hope this makes sense. The other thing that I really would like to point to is the question last year said, in today's world, which reinforces why examples from textbooks, and I include stuff I've written in the past, I would just put it on the shelf and park it there, recycle it or whatever. In today's world, it's asking for currency. It's asking to show that these young people are engaged in the world that they are going to go out into and help to create the future for. That's a really important point from last year. Some of you have probably seen this before, but the little formula for religious traditions and for peace, everything comes back to sacred texts. There are why, because every text reference is in of itself a teaching, which is why I also think when I see kids like have a list of these are the teachings from Christianity about peace, these are the teachings from Islam, whatever, every text is a teaching. And then, so they're the what, so the text is the why, and then the teachings they inform are the what we're meant to do, and the lived expression is your specific examples, okay? So I think a little formula, if the students can follow that, I like to use tables where they set up, here's my sacred text, here's what it teaches, here's my lived example. And for a lot of kids, just that simple way of summarising does help. So this complex thing, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on inner peace today than perhaps on the communal one. As I said, perhaps personal peace. What I would encourage you to do around this topic, because it is presented very glibly sometimes, and we all know from our own life journeys that this thing called inner peace is not always such an easy thing to hold on to. So I pose this question for you and the students to consider. What's the role of faith in assisting people, particularly in the times of life when holding on to internal peace can be complex, be that individuals, which we are kind of looking at here, but also religious communities. How does faith, or how can faith, how might faith, always that nuance, always it's not black and white, help? So I encourage you to consider that question with your students. Too many kids still present these bland generalizations and this concept that once a person has inner peace, I've got it for life, then they go out and contribute to world peace. I beg and plead of you, just as you would hope they're no longer saying, but they are, starting an essay with, peace is more than absence of war. We need to move on from that. So I would really hope that we won't do that anymore. However, we can show a deep connection that can exist between personal and communal peace for people of all faiths, and especially in the midst of some complex life circumstances. So again, it's a different way of looking at it, but to say, I've got inner peace, now I'm going to go out and contribute to world peace. It's a very big blanket statement that doesn't always hold and run true. So the example of Jesus, everything in Christianity has to come back to the example of Jesus. And in respect to peace, and this is where looking at those significant writings that was alluded to in the HSC last year, Jesus proclaimed in John's Gospel that the peace he was defining was not a worldly sort of peace. So we live here in a country like Australia in a world where we know it's, a secular agenda often, etc., that presents an ideal of peace that's probably not the ideal that Jesus was presenting. And so how do we help students to grapple with that? And how do Christians grapple with that in their own life? And for Christians who have deep faith, this text is certainly an anchor in the journey of life to try to not let your hearts be troubled. So it's a very important text that you might hopefully be able to unpack when you have more time. After Jesus' baptism, he went into the desert for 40 days. And he came back from that 40 days where he was tempted to use his power in a negative way. And he came back to his hometown and he went to the synagogue and he proclaimed these words from Isaiah, which is really, I guess, his manifesto, that he was anointed to bring good news, etc., and so on and so forth. And you may well remember that at the end of this proclamation, his friends and neighbours tried to throw him off a cliff because it seemed to be too radical a message, perhaps. And so really, this text, if you're talking about significant, it really does proclaim what Christians are meant to do in their daily lives to broker peace for themselves and for others. It's a beautiful text to explore more fully. Often ask people, well, what does this personal peace mean in light of what Jesus was proclaiming about peace not being of this world and so forth? I think it's really important for students to be able to explore this concept of prisons in a bigger manner, because prisons come in all shapes and sizes, as we know, in the daily life of human beings. Personal tragedy, mental health, so on and so forth. So I think it's important, and from there to then look for avenues of exploring how, in this instance, Christianity supports people when they feel that they are in these prisons. This is an amazing image that I can't stop using. And I often use it with students and sometimes get some giggles. And then I show them what it meant. And of course, it's the emptiness that a parent will always feel when they have lost a child. It's trying to explain the inexplainable. And how does one attain some sense of inner peace in the midst of such tragedy? So on the cross, Jesus cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And so for Christians, what distinguishes us from the other Abrahamic faiths, that God is in the midst of the suffering. Jesus endured the same suffering of humanity, and then the resurrection, of course, is the hope that suffering will end. And so for Christians of deep faith, there is that strong link in this quest for inner peace with a God who suffers with them. And that's an important point to hold on to. You would well remember that in February last year, 4 children were killed when a young man who was drunk and on drugs, had been on a big binge, struck them walking to buy ice cream, and their lives were instantly lost. I think last year, not just Christians, but all people were astounded at how the families and the Abdallahs, who lost 3 of their children, and of course their niece, Veronique, somehow managed, even in the immediate aftermath of this, to get through and make the statements that are on the screen at the moment. And I think they provide an amazing case study of how this peace of Christ that is not of the world gives can, for some Christians, it doesn't mean it necessarily works for everyone, maintain them in this dreadful time. So they astounded us then, and in 2021, I think they have taken it to a whole new level. So on the first anniversary of the loss of their children, they launched a national, what is to be an annual day of challenging all Australians of faith and no faith to reach out and to forgive, because most people will be carrying some burden of broken relationships and so forth, and drawing there on St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians. This is from their website. So if you haven't seen it, I've put in here the link to Danny Abdallah's address to the media on the launch of I Forgive Day. It's about 5 minutes. It's exceptional. And I would really encourage everyone to watch it. I think it has a lot to offer in terms of personal reflection. And I would encourage students to take a few statements from that they could then use in their in a response to show just what the sacred text, and they've got that beautiful reference from St. Paul there, can look like in the practice of Christians and can sustain them, even though we know for these families that have lost these children, that hole will always be there. But somehow their faith has sustained them to keep going. So I really encourage you to watch that and have a think about it. So how you might write about in a piece to lead into then writing about, for example, the Abdallahs. So you always first, and this is a skill for students to develop, got to somehow grapple with what do the sacred texts teach. So here we've got, you're showing the marker that it's not just this. Christians pray and gain inner peace. Christians meditate and gain inner peace. Christians go to Taizé and gain inner peace. Well, at the moment, not many Christians go to Taizé, and how many do go to Taizé? Okay, so those generalizations are not what we were intending as examples. We were intending this unfolding story. So it starts off through the example of Jesus. Help your students to, in some way, shape or form, in each time they talk about Christianity, to at least include that once. Many Christians. You'll notice that's not just saying all Christians, many Christians. Find courage, etc. And there's your short link, you don't need the long quote, to that reference from John, that, you know, this is a different sort of peace. And you're showing the marker that you understand the gravity, that it's not an instant fix, okay? And then you've got the link then from faith, etc. You list a few situations when people can need this sort of assistance to gain peace. And also it links to the hope of the resurrection and support of faith communities. That is something that really can be explored in Religion and Peace. And if you're studying baptism, it certainly links beautifully to baptism and that reciprocal responsibility of baptism to go out and to care. So, and again, you're showing analysis. It can't always alter what's happened, but it can support. And then a new paragraph that then uses, for example, in this instance, the Abdallah family or whatever, to then show one example of what this might look like in practice. So that's a little sample of what could happen. Another definitive text for all of Christianity is the final judgment in Matthew 25. And this is a little condensed version. I would really encourage that in some way, shape or form, that whole chapter is something that students reflect upon, so that they, when they're building those Lego blocks, they don't have to write out a lot of it, but they know the story and they know how integral this is to the Christian message. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is what Christians are called to do with each other, for themselves, in relationships and communally. And obviously, again, in a summary, it's that Christians must minister to those in need. And those who are marginalised, those who are in those prisons, it's such an incredibly central text. And there's so many areas you could explore for that. So I'm just going to show you one that, or point you to one that is a little bit perhaps different. It is a literal prison, but I think it's a story that also shows how, you know, we live in a world that can be very judgmental about those that are in literal prisons and so on and so forth. There's currently over 40,000 Australians who are in prison, and including juvenile detention and so forth. So that's a lot of people for whom hope might be a very hard thing to attain. So this started originally in the States, following the Casillo movement strategy, which was, I think, really a Catholic movement, but it's interdenominational. Came to Australia initially in 1995 out at Parramatta Correctional Facility, and now it has over 2,000 volunteers, and it's in all the states, and they do some wonderful things. And of course, Kairos, as opposed to Chronos, Kairos, in God's time, all in God's time. It's something really good to explore. So this was the 2019 HSC, and a Marvin Gaye song, interesting stimuli that they use. But this one was How do True Religious Traditions Guide Individuals to Find Peace. So this would not be an introduction, this would be a inverted commas body paragraph, but again, it could be a way of introducing Matthew 25, and also then you could link into whatever caring ministry. It might be hospital chaplaincy, it could be ministry to the homeless, it could be whatever. And so again, it's showing a little bit of analysis at the start. It's not always maybe that easy to find peace, and circumstances that are beyond personal control, etc. And breaking up the stimulus, that's another skill for students to learn. So then we've just got the two words, often leaves little ability to find peace. Okay. Then going into what did Jesus teach? What did Jesus define in the final judgment? That Christians are obligated, there's no question, to provide compassionate care to those who seem to feel without hope, those who are. And just that little snapshot there of how to condense what is a whole chapter of Matthew's Gospel to basically their 5 words is helping students to, again, develop that skill. So, and then the fact that there are many Christians like the 2,000 that work with Kairos and so many others who, by giving selfless support, not asking anything in return, that they do encounter Jesus in the most vulnerable. And then, etc., you could go on and do something with Kairos. So just another little way of approaching things, okay? This is something I did use last year, and I do try to update things more, but I think it's still relevant as COVID is still ongoing. And I suppose something you could explore is in the situation, for example, in India at the moment, which is again a dreadful situation. It's just so tragic. What's Christian outreach there, or what's the Muslim outreach or the Hindu outreach, depending on what traditions you're doing in the midst of this dreadful, dreadful situation. But this was a nice little piece on the Uniting Church of Australia in Leichhardt, and I'm remembering that we have to show breadth of tradition. It would be very easy just to have all Catholic examples because there are so many great ones, but again, breadth of tradition and their outreach during this time. So the 2017 question, I think this was another song. So songs are very popular for stimuli. To what extent do the teachings to religious traditions view the achievement of inner peace as an important step towards, etc.? So one way of just, and I won't go through this, you can read this in your own time, but how that outreach, be it through that prison ministry or be it through Danny and Layla Abdallah, and how they're dealing with their personal pain has then led them to encourage the whole Australian community to be reconciled as our peacemakers. It's a way of showing this link that is possible, but it doesn't mean that the individual is not still searching for and trying to hold on to that inner peace. Okay, so again, it's got that same link to those texts. And then just down the bottom of this part, it shows students how they can, in an exam situation, give a context. That's a really, really important point. They must provide a context for their example. Now, they're obviously not going to reference it, and they're certainly not handing in a bibliography, but they have to give a context so that the marker realises or appreciates, yeah, this is the real deal. It's not just something the students made up on the spur of the moment. And this, obviously, in a March 2020 ABC interview, and then you've got the Reverend from the Leichhardt Uniting Church and the reference from her. And this is where those Those very simple summaries of their Lego block examples are important for students. They just would have March 2020, ABC interview, Reverend Sukama White, there's a sense of grief. They don't need to write the whole story of what, in this instance, the Uniting Church did. Okay, so that's something else that's important. Context is always important. Then you could go on. What did the UCA do? Outreach, etc. And then you've got another from that same ABC interview writing about what it meant for her. And so you've got, in trying to assist people to maintain peace in a very complex circumstance, this ripple effect for the community grows. And it also, this is a great example for showing just how important the religious community was in maintaining connections to ensure that that peace was, at least to some extent, able to be in people's hearts and minds during this complex time. So it's a nice little example of that. Okay, so you are allowed to put questions in. I'm just getting a little reminder. You can put questions in. Okay, so if we move into this incredibly complex area of world peace, and the 1st of January each year is the World Day of Prayer for Peace. And each year Pope Francis, again, releases a statement. And there is another International Day of Peace, but that's in September. But the 1st of January is the World Day of Prayer for Peace. And if you look at this one, as always, it's not just a message for Catholics or Christians. It's to all people of goodwill. And that's something that Francis has been trying to teach us, that we are all created, every human being created in the image, likeness, the dignity of God. And so again, in this one, he emphasised one of his favourite words, fraternity. I think it's mentioned 7 times in this. And of course, Fratelli Tutti, his beautiful encyclical last year, is another one that flows on and develops that concept. It's obviously essential and good for peace as well. But justice, you can't talk about religion and peace, obviously, without talking about justice. It's a beautiful document. So another definitive text in terms of religion and peace. A great story. A lawyer says to Jesus, well, what have I got to do? And Jesus was the ultimate teacher. Jesus says, well, what do you think you've got to do? And, well, love God, follow the commandments. Correct. And so the conversation goes on. And so then the young man asks a really complex question. Who is my neighbour? And of course, from this, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan who was the enemy. The Samaritan who did not abandon the man who had been beaten and left to die. He did not abandon the abandoned. And the story unfolds. And it unfolds to where the Samaritan takes the man to an inn. And he doesn't just dump him on the doorstep. And the innkeeper was probably a little brave too, that he let the Samaritan bring this gentleman in and so forth. There's a lot of bravery in this story. The story tells us that the Samaritan stayed the night and took care of him. And then he paid for his ongoing care and he said he would come back. Christians are challenged in this story to see all people as neighbour. And they are reminded that they are not to abandon those who are left by the wayside. And that can be a challenge. That can be a real challenge. And so in terms of peacemaking, the Good Samaritan, peacemaking in a global or a communal context, is such an important teaching for students to grapple with. So last year, on Francis's writing for the World Day of Peace, he reminded us of another integral text, the one that I had on the opening slide of this presentation. This whole story when his friend said, well, have I got to forgive 7 times? How many times do I have to forgive? No. 7 times, but 77 times. In other words, that path to reconciliation, forgiveness, the holding of grudges and so forth, as human as it may be, that's not what Jesus teaches his followers to do. And Francis really reiterated that in his writing for the World Day of Prayer last year. And that's a hard one to grapple with. That's a really hard one to grapple with. So it's something, again, for personal reflection, but also for students to think about when they're coping with the challenges of communal peace. In 2019, on the 4th of February, there was a landmark document that I'm sure and I hope that all of you have taken a good, strong look at, the document on human fraternity. And it was an outstanding statement. And when you consider Islam and Christianity together form more than half the world's population, that to come together in terms of building peace and harmony, fraternity, it was such a big statement. Now, you should be aware that not all Catholics were happy with Pope Francis signing that document, and you could do some research and exploration around that to add another layer of analysis to religion and peace. Albeit a minority view, but nevertheless, some felt that it was outside the boundary of Catholic tradition. So since 2019, it wasn't just signed on the dotted line and that was the end of it. You can read the statement there. It's not very long, and it's got so much content that you could take just a line from for a peace response. But it's had so many ripple effects. Religious leaders from all traditions have signed on to the document, and there certainly could be some scope to explore that and to have an example of where it's taken root and had new shoots in different ways around the world. On this year, as a response to the document on human fraternity, the United Nations really had the first International Day of Human Fraternity, and in World Interfaith Harmony Week. Now, there's potential there for you as well to link to religion in Australia post-45. What happened here for World Interfaith Harmony Week? And there's your one example that you could use for both peace and for post-45. But when you keep drilling down the research, there was the Zayed Award, and the first recipients were Pope Francis and the Grand Imam for Human Fraternity. They received it last year. But this year, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and this amazing lady, Latifa Ibn Ziyaten, I've probably got that wrong, were the dual recipients this year. And having a look at it, and so this is just from February this year, this is an amazing story that would make a superb case study for religion and peace. Certainly for Islam, but also for how the document of human fraternity, how it's being acknowledged in different way, this building peace between. And her story is one that I really encourage you to read. So just a tragedy, another tragedy. Her son was killed by a terrorist act, and how she's using that to work for peace. So I'm just watching the clock here. I was doing okay. So a beautiful story to explore. This is something that not everybody is conscious of, that in 1998, the Westminster Abbey, I guess you would say, unveiled a whole new section of statues to the Christian martyrs of the 20th century. And amongst them were Maximilian Kolbe, Oscar Romero, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And this is a place that might be worthy of doing some study. I know some schools study Bonhoeffer as a significant person, and so to have a look at this, but to see then where it goes. You know, you would probably be conscious that he was murdered by the Nazis just very shortly before the war came to an end for his opposition to every aspect of Nazism. And there's a beautiful church quote there from him about the church. It's only church when it's there for others, not dominating, but helping and serving. Okay. And to be there for others. He himself felt that some of the churches in Germany had, given in to the Nazis. And of course, he wasn't prepared to do that, which is why he lost his life. But to be there for others. So what's that got to do with looking at the contemporary world? So there are so many initiatives within the Lutheran Church and other Protestant churches, and again, looking for breadth of tradition, that have really taken to heart Bonhoeffer's example and Bonhoeffer's call for the church to be there for others. Very similar to exactly what Francis and so many other Christian leaders are saying. And a wonderful example of that in the last few years is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA. Kids would only have to write that once and then brackets ELCA, and that would be okay. And in 2019, and it is one of the larger denominations in the States, it declared that it was going to become a sanctuary denomination. This ancient tradition of the Christian church, that when people were in danger, when people were fleeing, when people were being victimized, that they could seek sanctuary in the church and they would be safe there because the authorities would not enter. And obviously in America in particular, the instances of undocumented people in society and policies that were brought in that were extreme in many instances. So they decided that they had to put into practice what Dietrich Bonhoeffer was saying and follow Martin Luther as well, to become a sanctuary denomination. And when you do some research on it, you will find case studies of where people have stayed literally in Lutheran churches in America for years now, seeking safety from deportation, which for them seems to be unjustified. It's an amazing thing. This is also a fabulous link with baptism, and wherever possible, the more we can condense the amount of content kids have to have stuck in their head, and we can nuance that content so that it's applied across different areas of the syllabus, the better. Okay, and so in this instance, they talk very openly on their website that baptism brings people into a covenantal relationship that makes them commit to strive for justice and peace. And certainly, I know I'm dipping into baptism here, but for all the practices, that last part of the practice, which is the most important point, what's the impact on individuals and communities? And that's an area students really do struggle to do well with. Again, very bland, generalized statements. This is exactly what we're talking about, that this reciprocal responsibility of baptism, it's a gift, but it requires a response in practice. So the language in this little paragraph here is fantastic. And then again, if you did the research, you could go on and do the example of what it looks like. And this is, I think, from memory, is just a little start there of what you could do against the 2021 and how you could show some sort of a link there, okay? And that's an introduction that you could look at there. So in your own time, obviously, because I think I'm just checking my watch, apologies for doing that. And again, linking back to Matthew 25. So I suppose I've got one more really recent one. This is the 26th of April that I would absolutely encourage you to look at. The Archbishop of Canterbury, as the head of the International Anglican Communion, or the head in a different way to what Pope Francis is head of the Catholic Church, it does offers some truly amazing projects. This is exceptional. And as you can see, it's called Faith in a World of Conflict. And It's to actually try and assist people who want to work for peace and want to do more in their own lives with some structures, with some ideas, with some concepts. And it's going to be about developing 3 habits defined by Scripture, defined in sacred text: to be curious, to be present, and to reimagine. And they're very different terms, because, you know, when I first saw be curious, I thought, what does that mean? But the website will tell you, and you can for free subscribe, and you will get the updates as this project is launched. And there's going to be stories of peacemakers, stories who people have had to really grapple to find peace, some wonderful material. And I think to show from an Church of England or Anglican perspective, this could be a great 2021 example to explore and to use. So it's called Difference, the Power of Faith in a Conflicted World, and it's a course of 5 sessions, etc. And the overview is here. So to be curious is to seek to value and understand the other, and it's founded in Genesis. To be present, to truly encounter others and to build trust and so forth, and to reimagine, to find hope where we long to see change. I think it's an exceptional structure, and I would truly encourage you to find that. Yeah. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Just got the question there. So, you know, I actually, I'll be honest, I only discovered that late last night myself, and I'm looking forward to exploring this more, because I know it's going to be a bit of a goldmine for us. But none of this is just about an ATAR. Yes, it's about a good ATAR. Studies of religion is so much more than an ATAR, so much more than an ATAR. And, you know, the next thing the kids have to do, of course, you have to practice writing. Forget all those pages of notes. As Abdul Rahman, who topped 2 unit in 2019, still reminds us, he went into the 2 unit trial in HSC with 15 pages of notes, dot point summaries. He did every single past question he could lay his hands on. He knew his Lego blocks so well that he was a Lego master on the day of his exam. And because he just knew the stories, knew the facts, had the facts summarized, and he could write them so well. So I guess it's a big topic to try and cover in less than an hour, and then maybe take time for some questions. But we do join with all those praying for peace in our world. And we do, in our work with our students, and students, if you're listening, in how you take this into your lives, we are able to bring about our own little piece of good to live that example of Jesus, who is the Prince of Peace, and to, in our own lives and the lives of others, hopefully create a more harmonious and a more respectful, reminding you that we never use the word tolerance or tolerate in the syllabus. We don't want to tolerate people. We want to respect people. We want to live in peace and harmony with people. So I think we have a question, and I'm just going to skip back about 5,000 slides here to answer this question. It's probably another way to do it, but I'll just do it this way. It's almost there. It's almost there. Ching. Oh, gone too far. Okay, the question was, can we use international? Absolutely. Go back to the aims of the syllabus, okay? The nature of religion and belief systems in local and global contexts, right? It's fantastic to have those local examples, such as, for example, Danny and Layla or whatever, but go for balance, which is why, you know, things like the document on human fraternity, or such as that wonderful story coming out of that about the lady in France who lost her son, the American example. There's so many. I mean, they're just a snapshot. There's thousands of examples you can use. But I remember I was presenting a holiday workshop at a school a couple of years ago, and I said this, and I often say to students, How often do you engage each week, every week, with a news service? At least 2 or 3. And I'll ask them, put your hand up if you engage at least 2 or 3 times a week. Most students don't do it. And sometimes I'll say to those that do put their hands up, well, what's your news service? And they might say Channel 9 News, and that's fine, or Channel 7, whatever. This year, in all the times I've asked it and all the schools I've been in, one out of so many classes said, every night my family and I, we watch the ABC News together and we discuss it. And of course that student is excelling not just in studies of religion, but in other areas for study as well. So anything you can do to assist students to engage in what's really happening. You know, this is the richness of this thing we call dynamic living religion. And again, please tell the kids not to write that phrase, because HSC markers are sick of hearing it. Demonstrate it by your examples. That to engage with the reality of religion, I think is so much more important for them in their own thinking about the place of religion in the contemporary world. So I absolutely encourage you, local and global, and you know, never stop reinventing the wheel in terms of the examples that you're using, because every day there's something new to learn. We got any more questions? We haven't got any more questions. So if you'd like to quickly pop one in, we've still got some minutes. I'll probably rush through that thinking there might be some more questions, but anything at all, if you'd like to pose it. Okay. All right, well, thank you again. This will be available to you. I'm regretting now. I'll just tell you one little story. I did take something out because I thought I wouldn't have enough time. A few years ago, I was really very fortunate to be able to do some study overseas. And I met with Bawa Jain, who's the Secretary General of the Council of World Religious Leaders. And I met him in New York on Easter Sunday. And he told me about what they do. And we really don't read about their work. And I would guarantee that there are religious envoys working around the clock in what's going on in the Holy Land at the moment to try and broker some sort of peace in that chaos. And he talked to me about Pope John Paul II. And he said when in 2003 the world was going to war in Iraq, he worked tirelessly, as did other Christian and Muslim leaders, to avoid conflict. And I know, for example, he sent an envoy to President George W. Bush and so on and so forth. And Bawa Jain said to me that really, if it hadn't been, especially for Pope John Paul II and other religious leaders, that war could have very easily become a full-on religious war. It was, in fact, referred to by a couple in the American context as a crusade. So we should never underestimate the power of faith leaders and our actions to broker peace in whatever place. And he asked me to say to teachers and students in my future work not to be afraid to work for peace, because his phrase was, every single person can be a diplomat for peace. And so that's something to think about and to encourage in the students who are placed in our care, for sure. That's it. Okay, well, thank you. And I wish you peace and a great success, students. And remember those practice essays and refine those notes. Thank you so much. Take care. God bless.